situations in mind. One would be ASL, where space is sort of arbitrarily defined for the frame of a current referent, and a different one, but there's a relationship which would be an electronic screen, like a touch screen, in which the space moves around and
Well, so that last one is some of what at lunch when I was talking about my son plays a lot of Minecraft, and so we talked about that. And I think one thing that's very interesting about that, he's older, but still, I mean, you look at that world that they get into, right? And I don't know how familiar you are, but it's a virtual world, and he's playing with his friends in there, and they're playing things like Hunger Games, right? Okay, so they're killing each other, but they have to know where everybody is in this virtual world that they are not in, right? So some of the processes for encoding space are going to be different, and how does that change if that's what you're exposed to early? What can he do that I can't even imagine because he's used to thinking about these things and tracking these things in ways that I might not? The same spatial reference frames may not work. I mean, they've got to in some ways, but there's got to be some interesting differences, right? So I don't know about that. What I would say at the very young stuff, I would think about this space in terms of the baby's action space, right? And so in this way, thinking almost Piagetian in terms of sensory motor. I know where things are because I've reached to them and I've interacted with these objects and I've encoded them in terms of where they've been, right? There are, of course, all kinds of interesting things you could test there in terms of doing this with a looking versus a reaching, although looking is a behavior that also happens in space, so you can't completely pull it apart with all of those kinds of things, right? There's some interesting interactions maybe for the strength of what's laid down across those two, but the model suggests that they should both have interactions, right? But there should be all kinds of cool things we can do to try to parse out, right, and other things in terms of, you know, as you get better at more finely encoding spatial dimensions, these tasks were all very easy, not easy, but for you easy, right, left, right? But children develop in their ability of how finely they can do this, right? So a 4-year-old might be able to do, you know, right edge, right center, and well, for you guys it's fine, right edge, right center, left center, right, and do 4 objects in that way. 3-year-old or 18-month-old, no, I don't think so, right? So I think we still have some work to do to kind of figure out what space means. But I'm starting with an idea that it's going to be embodied in this way. It's going to be what you can reach to, interact with, etc. Right? Yeah.
So I'm wondering what you're thinking is in terms of the importance of space itself. Is it, and I think you got at this a little bit with your color manipulation. It seems like space works better than color works.
Right.
Is space just a really great example of context? I mean, is there, so I get this kind of question, face perception all the time. So are we really good at faces because they just happen to be really great examples of what, you know, we see all the time?
Well, okay, so context is a slippery thing because you have to be very careful about what you mean by context, right? And in the way you just said it, I actually think, yes, that's what it might be. So what I mean is you can't get away from space, okay? It's with you all the time. You're interacting in space. Your body, you know, arms go out to particular locations, your eyes are going to particular locations in space, and it's actually not the fact that when you do that without some weird manipulation that the space is going to shift radically on you, right? Or you're going to be in some weird sci-fi movie, right? I mean, and it would make sense then, and we know, right, that we encode spatial information. We think about objects in terms of locations and features, right? And so that information is there, and how far can that kind of get us into being able to? Now, that said, right, we interact in different kinds of spaces, right? So if you want to say context, and actually I'm a co-mentor on a F-32 project for a postdoc working with Carl McGregor in communication sciences. And what Katie's Gordon student is interested in is space in a different way. She's actually pulling up on some of Rebecca Gomez's work that shows encoding of context and things. And so what she's done is she's learning kids are learning some novel words in a task that's much like the reference selection task in one context defined by being in a particular room. And she's particularly interested in SLI. So they learn it in this particular context, and then she moves them to other cases. And she's looking to see what helps children generalize across contexts better in terms of different kinds of mappings. And then looking to see if children with SLI show differences in their ability to generalize across these contexts, right? Because in therapy, when you're trying to get a child who's not learning a lot of words to be able to produce those words, if you're always teaching those words in the therapy room, right, the big task is to get them to be, they can get really good, but the task is to get them to be able to do it elsewhere, right? And so can context and can space in that kind of way help? And if you provide cues that help them pull their knowledge, right? Now the interesting thing is she presented some preliminary data, and so she has a task where she tests them in different places, but just to see what was going on, she showed them pictures of some of the rooms they were in to see if they even could remember their spaces. These are 3 to 5-year-olds. They were horrible at remembering their spaces, right? And so there was also some interesting things where the cues that she thought would be the things that they were using to encode those spaces may not be the right ones, right, as depicted in the picture she ended up showing them. So there's lots of kind of interesting things there. I think that kind of starts to get it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Other questions? I think you guys have another talk to run off to, right? Okay.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.